some livestock feeds at subsidized prices. Under arable farming, different types of farmers have been identified and classified as subsistence, emerging, and commercial. Assistance, Madam Speaker, to these farmers will be targeted depending on their situation. The horticulture subsector has also been boosted by the inclusion of irrigated farming under Integrated Support Program for Arable Agriculture Development, ISPAR, where farmers contribute 60% while government contributes 40% towards the cost of installing irrigation equipment. Government assistance, Madam Speaker, is aimed at encouraging production in the agricultural sector, but most importantly, to graduate more farmers into commercial entities capable of creating decent jobs for Botswana. Tourism subsector. Madam Speaker, the tourism subsector also has potential for growth and employment creation. In this regard, the efforts continue to be directed towards broadening the country's tourism base in terms of geographical location and product diversification, such as cultural tourism. The community-based natural resources management policy has continued to bear fruit in terms of development of sizable projects that are non-wildlife based, thereby diversifying the tourism product to include culture, heritage sites, and monuments in less developed tourism destinations. Tourism projects such as Home Oremi Resort, Seboba Nature and Recreation Park in Kasane, the Kopole Nature Reserve, amongst others, have a community ownership dimension, which is important, with the potential to increase employment in rural areas. Manufacturing, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, despite the sluggish growth in the manufacturing sector in Botswana, the sector has potential, I'm afraid, to contribute towards economic growth and employment creation. Therefore, the government will continue to promote domestic and foreign direct investment into the sector and provide targeted fiscal incentives to major manufacturing projects to enhance value addition and competitiveness of their products. To this end, development strategies for the leather, dairy, and textile and clothing subsectors were completed during 2012-13 financial year as part of the economic diversification drive. The focal area of the leather industry strategy is the proposed development of a leather industry park whose bankable feasibility study is being awaited. The dairy industry strategy will focus on transforming the industry into a competitive and profitable industry through investment in productive dairy support infrastructure. I tend to improving productivity and sustaining sovereign credit rating. Madam Speaker, to achieve growth in some of the non-mining sectors requires investment both domestic and foreign. Such investments can only take place in a stable macroeconomic environment and where there is high productivity. Unfortunately, the latter has been falling in recent years. In this respect, government is engaged in continuous training of its employees, in public sector reforms that encourage good employer-employee relationships, very important, and in leadership training, as well as measures to improve the conditions of the public service, subject to availability of resources. For the broader economy, the Botswana National Productivity Center is undertaking programs to improve productivity and promote a culture of high performance throughout the economy. With regard to sovereign credit rating, both Moody's Investor Service and Standard & Poor's, the rating agencies, have maintained Botswana's investment-grade sovereign credit ratings with a stable outlook. The ratings reflect, Madam Speaker, strong financial position of the government attributed to prudent fiscal policies and the long record of political stability. We hope this will continue. The assessments by these agencies have also noted that the assessment, Madam Speaker, by these agencies have also noted that the Botswana authorities' response to uncertainty in the recovery of the global economy was effective and engendered confidence that the country will continue to respond appropriately to economic challenges. However, the rating agencies have noted that the economy is vulnerable to shocks, which could reduce asset buffers in the form of government savings and foreign exchange reserves. To enhance competitiveness and doing business in Botswana, the government, in collaboration with the World Bank, is implementing several projects under the Economic Diversification and Competitiveness Program that include improvement of the business environment by streamlining business registration, licensing and issuance of permits, establishment of e-government policies and standards, and capacity building to support monitoring and evaluation of national strategies and policies. Madam Speaker, in all the sectors that I have just reviewed, the overall ease of doing business is a critical ingredient. According to the latest Doing Business Index rating by the World Bank, Botswana improved by moving to position 56 out of 189 countries compared to position 65 out of 185 countries in 2013 rating. Similarly, the 2013-14 Global Competitiveness Report by the World Economic Forum shows that Botswana has also improved from position 79 out of 144 countries to position 74 out of 148 countries. The implementation of the rankings, the improvement of the rankings rather, was largely consistent with the macroeconomic fundamentals, such as attaining a balanced budget, resulting in increased national savings and national credit worthiness. Botswana, Madam Speaker, is also strong in the category of countries having reliable and transparent institutions. I now turn to investing in infrastructural development to support economic growth. Madam Speaker, one of the necessary conditions for private investment is the availability of a well-functioning infrastructure. In this regard, the government will continue to develop key infrastructural facilities with a view to providing service to the citizens, and also as a strategy to promote private sector investment that is necessary for growth and employment creation. Further, government will continue to focus on the creation of a conducive environment for private sector investment by investing in key projects and programs such as service land, energy, water, transport and communications. These inputs, Madam Speaker, are key stimulants to other sectors of the economy and will therefore continue to receive a larger share of the budgetary resources. And I shall now briefly address each of these areas: service land, energy, water, transport, and communications. Energy. Madam Speaker, one of the critical inputs to any productive investment is power supply. While the effects of the shortage of power supply on the economy have not been assessed in a systematic way, it is expected that it has had a negative impact on growth. It's obvious. In addition, it has slowed down the government's village electrification program. In recognition of the importance of power supply to economic growth and ordinary lives in general, the government has taken short and medium-term measures to mitigate the impact of power supply shortage on the economy. In this regard, it is in this regard that a significant allocation has been made under the proposed 2014-2015 budget to Botswana Power Corporation to enable the corporation not only to operate and maintain existing power infrastructure, but also to put up new transmission lines in different parts of the country. In addition, the ongoing rural electrification program that involves expansion of the infrastructure and village networks is expected to increase access to electricity from the current 68% to 80% of households by 2016. 68% to 80% of households by 2016. That is development. In the meantime, in the medium to long term, measures to address the growing demand of power include the development of brownfields for Morupule B, which will be units 5 and 6, with an estimated power generation of 300 megawatts, and the development of greenfield, also with an estimated 300 megawatts. In addition, a bankable feasibility study of 100 megawatts concentrated solar thermal power station has been completed. Furthermore, Madam Speaker, the government is working on the expansion of the national grid to provide services to villages, to agribusinesses, mining, and tourism facilities. To this end, the government has budgeted 300 million pula for the construction of the Northwest Transmission Grid and Rakola substation to provide power to the Northwest region and augment power in the Southeast region. The government will continue, Madam Speaker, to ensure increased access to electricity from local sources. But as this comes at a high cost, it is expected that electricity service will be periodically adjusted accordingly to reflect the economic cost of supplying power. Transport, another important sector for growth and employment creation. Madam Speaker, over the years, the government has invested in transport and communications infrastructure as this was necessary for growth and improved standard of living. Some businesses need to move their goods within the country from places of production to the consumers, while others need to export them to outside markets. A well-developed transport and communication system is therefore critical in ensuring competitiveness of our local producers in international markets. In addition, the development of the road network, which has opened up the country's hinterland, thus improving access to social facilities such as hospitals. Further, the expansion of the communications network, especially the mobile cellular, has improved doing business in the country. Given the strategic importance of this sector, and to ensure reasonable return on private investment, the government will continue to allocate resources to the sector and introduce new policies. In this regard, the National Integrated Transport Policy has been developed and is being processed for approval. The policy will define the transport system in terms of the infrastructure, operations, and management of all different types of transport. I now deal with land, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, shortage of service land has been identified by investors and some external agencies as a constraint to investment. To improve delivery of service land, the government is in the process of developing guidelines for a public-private, thank you very much, sir, for a public-private participation strategy in land servicing. The implementation of the guidelines is expected to start during 2014-15 financial year. In addition, plans are underway to carry out a high-density and high-value developments in certain prime areas of Gaborone, aimed at optimizing the use of service land. In the meantime, the government has embarked on the exercise of national land registration through the LAPCAS project, whose aim is to capture data on land rights and parcels. It is expected, Madam Speaker, that apart from improving land management, this exercise will enable tribal landholders to use their land as collateral and thus enhancing their borrowing capacity for investment in productive activities. I now turn to investing in human capital to support sustainable economic growth. Madam Speaker, the availability of trained labor force is critical to private investment, which itself is necessary for economic growth. A skilled workforce contributes to the overall productivity of the economy, which is necessary for competitiveness. It is for this reason, Madam Speaker, that the government has continued to invest in human capital development as part of its strategy for promoting sustainable economic growth. In this regard, the government has over the years allocated about a quarter of the total budget to education and skills development. This trend, I'm afraid, will continue in the next financial year, as an estimated 29% is proposed for allocation to the sector. Madam Speaker, a healthy labor force is a productive labor force. In this regard, the government considers investment in health as part of human capital development that is necessary to support economic growth. Hence, the government has over the years invested substantial budgetary resources in the health sector. Such investments have not only led to the improvement in the country's social indicators, such as life expectancy, but also contributed to the availability of a healthy workforce. The government will continue to invest in maintaining the existing stock of human capital by, among others, provision of improved health services and making available resources for treatment of conditions such as tuberculosis and HIV/AIDS. A major threat, Madam Speaker, to the achievements we have made in combating HIV and AIDS is the decline in donor funding. This means that the government will be facing increasing financial responsibilities to fill in the gap. That is the financing gap. Despite these challenges, additional measures will continue to be undertaken in order to improve on the delivery of health services on a sustainable basis. In this regard, the government has revised the national health policy and the process of developing a health financing strategy is underway. The strategy will propose alternative ways of funding the healthcare system in the country, given the continued budgetary situation. In addition, the strategy will explore ways to contain costs in the health delivery services and promote efficiency. Population growth and skills development. Madam Speaker, the 2011 population and housing census indicated that of the total population of 2,024,904, 43% was aged below 20 years, while 35% was aged between 20 and 40 years. Such a population structure, Madam Speaker, poses a challenge for human capital development in terms of resources required to train the youth, but also in terms of creation of employment opportunities to absorb them in the labor market. However, as indicated in successive budgets, the government has demonstrated its commitment to the development of human capital by providing substantial resources for training and skill development, as evidenced by the annual budgetary allocation to the education sector. In addition, a number of short-term measures have been adopted to improve on the skills of the young people and also provide temporary employment for them. Such measures include entrepreneur development and promotion, life skills development, mentorship, behavior change and character building, and information and communications technology enhancement. These initiatives are expected to prepare the youth to take advantage of any increase in gainful employment opportunities. I now address enhancing people's welfare and livelihood. Madam Speaker, poverty remains a major development challenge in Botswana. This situation has continued to weigh down on the country's Human Development Index, HDI, which is a composite measure of the quality of life comprising of indices of life expectancy, education, and income. Botswana's HDI increased from 0.587 in 2000 to reach 0.634 in 2011, which indicates an improvement in the country's standard of living. While the quality of life has improved, challenges still remain, particularly in the eradication of abject poverty. Therefore, the government will continue to provide resources to social welfare programs such as destitution allowance, school feeding programs, and other programs aimed at the vulnerable groups in our society. Vulnerable groups. In addition, the ePelegem program will continue to provide temporary relief to the unemployed. However, despite government's commitment to the goal of poverty eradication, it is important that social welfare programs are regularly evaluated lest they create a dependency syndrome. In this regard, the government will remain vigilant about the long-term sustainability or funding of social welfare programs to ensure that they contribute to increased economic activity and benefit the intended target groups. The government has also taken the decision to introduce a social safety net in the financial year 2014-2015, which will target people living with disabilities. Furthermore, affirmative action has been adopted to employ graduates with disabilities. I'm happy to indicate that to date, 38 of the 63 who have applied to the Directorate of Public Service Management have been placed in permanent employment. I now address strengthening judicial system. I address strengthening the judicial system and combating crime. Madam Speaker, a well-functioning judicial system and low crime environment are some of the prerequisites environment for private sector investment. Therefore, the government is committed to strengthening both the judiciary and security agents to ensure that Botswana remains a safe destination for investment. With a view to ensuring a low crime investment environment, the government will continue to provide the resources to the security agencies, especially the Botswana Police Service. Especially the Botswana Police Service. To enhance effectiveness on the Directorate of Corruption and Economic Crime to deal with and combat corruption, the Corruption and Economic Crime Amendment Act of 2013 has been put into effect as of July 2013. The successful implementation of the Act and other complementary legal tools, such as corruption audits, is expected to help reduce government funds that are lost through corruption practices. Besides loss of government funds, Madam Speaker, an environment characterized by high crime tends to discourage foreign direct investment, which is necessary for economic growth and employment creation. And lastly, Madam Speaker, on this issue of the key themes, before I proceed to the budgets, I deal with strengthening local governance. Madam Speaker, The government is currently drafting regulations that will guide the operations of village development committees, as well as govern property ratings in the major urban villages. The drafting of these regulations is expected to be completed in March 2014. The Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development is in the process of preparing the local economic development policy framework to guide districts in developing their local economies. The policy framework is expected to be in place by June 2014. Implementation of the policy framework will commence as a pilot exercise in 4 districts of Chobe, Francistown, Kalahari, and Suwa. The pilot exercise will undertake economic assessment of different localities and develop strategies according to their local economic comparative advantage. Madam Speaker, I now turn to the budgets. And I shall start with reviewing the 2012-13 budget outturn. Madam Speaker, the budget outturn for the 2012-13 financial year was an overall budget surplus of 922 million, compared to the estimated surplus of 835 million in the revised budget estimates. This result was mainly due to underspending in the development budget. Total revenue and grants amounted to 41.66 billion in 2012-13, representing a decrease of 253 million, or 0.6%, from 41.9 billion in the revised budget estimates. The decline in total revenues was due to the underperformance of the non-mineral tax revenue, which amounted to 6.73 billion, a decrease of 1.15 billion, or 14.6%, as a result of the underperformance of the VAT revenue. Total expenditure and net lending in 2012-13 amounted to 40.74 billion, compared to 41.08 billion in the revised budget, representing an underspending of 399 million, or about 0.8% of the revised budget. Of the total amount, the recurrent expenditure was 32.11 billion, compared to 31.77 billion in the revised budget estimates, representing an increase of 1.1%. Development expenditure, on the other hand, stood at 8.3 billion, representing an underspending of 1.08 billion, or 11.5% of the revised budget. Madam Speaker, I now review the 2013-14 revised budget before moving to the proposed budget of 2014-15. Madam Speaker, the 2013-14 revised budget shows an estimated surplus, small one, of 386.16 million, down from the original estimate of 779.3 million. Total revenue and grants increased by 3.1%, from 44.02 billion in the original budget to 45.43 billion in the revised estimates, due to an increase in Bank of Botswana revenue. The revised total expenditure and net lending for 2013-14 is an estimated 45.04 billion, representing an increase of 4.1% over the original budget of 43.24 billion. This was due to a significant increase of over 10% in the development budget through supplementary budgets. Among the major beneficiaries of an increase in the budget through supplementaries were the Ministry of Minerals, Energy and Water Resources, with 1.1 billion for support to the energy sector, and Agriculture, with 105 million for drought relief. Madam Speaker, I now address the 2014-15 proposals, budget proposals. Madam Speaker, Since this is the first budget following the adoption of the midterm review of NDP 10, I wish to underscore the importance of consolidating and realigning our expenditures in order to achieve the goals and aspirations of Botswana's long-term vision 2016. This is particularly important as the preparation of this budget took place under an environment of uncertainty with respect to global economic outlook, which has a bearing on the domestic economic performance in general and in revenue prospects in particular. In this regard, Madam Speaker, the budgetary allocation priorities for 2014-15 financial year, as indicated in the budget strategy paper that we circulated earlier, will include maintenance and efficient operation of existing infrastructure, funding key economic infrastructure such as water, energy, and communications to support growth, and completion of ongoing projects, obviously, and the funding of social welfare programs such as the Poverty Eradication Program. Revenues and grants for next financial year. Madam Speaker, the projected total revenue and grants for 2014-15 amount to 50.18 billion pula, comprising of customs and excise at 15.97 billion or 31.8%, non-mineral revenues, i.e. income tax and VAT, at 15.66 billion or 31.2%, and mineral revenue at 15.24 billion or 30.4%. The proposed budget indicates that all the three major sources of revenue will register growth over the revised budget of customs and excise increase by 14.3%, mineral revenue by 13%, and non-mineral revenue by 11.1%. A further breakdown of the growth in non-mineral revenue reveals that income tax and value-added tax revenues are expected to grow by 6.7% and 19.5% respectively over the 2013-14 revised budget estimates. Recurrent budget. Madam Speaker, the proposed ministerial recurrent budget for the financial year 2014-2015 is 33.32 billion pula, which represents an increase of 2.79 billion or 9.1% over the 2013-14 revised budget